Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and one of the questions I have been getting a lot since getting my M1 Max MacBook Pro is how well does it perform in gaming? Because there's a lot of questions here. Now, theoretically, with this beefy 32-core GPU and some of the benchmarks we've already seen from my previous videos, this laptop should theoretically do pretty well at gaming. And honestly, if you look at just the specs of the laptop with its ProMotion 120Hz display and all of this graphics power in a energy efficient design, should be like an amazing gaming laptop. But there are some questions to answer here, and that is just the history of the Mac and games, because if you look at the Mac's history, it has never been a good gaming computer or a good gaming laptop, and Mac games in general were never well optimized, and they're even less well optimized ever since the move over to Apple Silicon. But I still want to see how this performs as a gaming laptop, and also just to test this 32-core GPU and see if there are any thermal or performance issues when we look at the 14-inch MacBook Pro compared to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, because the 16-inch MacBook Pro is bigger, so it actually might perform a little bit better thermally, or there just might be something in its design that would allow those 32-core GPUs to perform at a higher volume. All right, now I know games are probably one of the most important things on the planet, but you know what's a close second? Saving our oceans. Now, as someone who is from the state of New Jersey, I have always loved going to the ocean. But there is a big problem, and that is that there is an estimated 30 million pounds of trash in the ocean. That's a lot of trash, but thankfully we have some help from Mr. Beast, Mark Roper, and a ton of other creators who are all donating to help remove all of this trash from our ocean and rivers with TeamSeas.
We're following up Team Trees with TeamSeas.
And we need your help to get 30 million pounds of plastic and trash out of the freaking ocean.
So that with every dollar you donate, TeamSeas plans to remove 1 pound of trash from the ocean. So just by even donating $1 to this cause, you can help remove a lot of trash from our oceans and rivers and help make this planet a better place. And if you want to know even more about TeamSeas, you can check out teamseas.org. But for now, you can actually donate right over here in YouTube if you want to help this effort out. All right, thank you all so much for your help, and let's get back to testing games on this MacBook. One of the first games I want to test is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Now, this is generally regarded as a pretty good Mac port, and it actually has an inbuilt benchmarking tool and support for 120 Hz on the display. So I'm gonna run this first at the highest graphics setting with a 1080p resolution to see what kind of frame rates we get. Okay, well that's pretty interesting. So we're already seeing that we're getting above 60 frames per second, but one of the things that's concerning to me is we are noticing some stuttering here. Now, even though I said this was a port that is pretty well done on Mac OS, this is still running through the Rosetta translation layer. So understand that there is a translation layer on top of all of this gameplay, and this isn't even hitting the maximum performance that the M1 Max could theoretically give you if this game was designed to take advantage of Apple Silicon. So all of these games that I'm testing today are pretty much being held back by that Rosetta translation layer. It's just a, matter of if the silicon is strong enough to kind of overcome this translation layer where we can see good performance. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised here with this benchmark. On highest settings, running through the Rosetta translation layer, based on what I've already tested with Shadow of Mordor, which maybe isn't a good port to the Mac to begin with, this is performing better than I expected. Again, this is highest settings at 1080p, and getting above 60 frames per second for a Mac, that's good. Another thing I kind of want you to focus on right here as we run this benchmark is the fan noise. So generally when I use the 14-inch MacBook Pro, even when editing in an intensive program like Final Cut Pro, I never hear the fan spin up. But in this benchmark specifically, or in basically any of the games we play today, you're gonna notice there is some fan noise here. Now, right now it's not super loud. It's actually an acceptable amount of fan noise, but still, this is what seems to peg that M1 Max. Whenever you're utilizing those GPU cores, the fan does seem to turn on. Now, besides from that slight stuttering we saw at the beginning of this benchmark, which I probably think is due to that translation layer, what we're seeing here in this benchmark, I think is good. For a Mac that is running through translation, we're basically seeing 70 FPS on highest settings. So this game should be pretty much playable at 60 FPS at its highest settings at 1080p. So I'm pretty happy with those results. But I do have to say there is one thing you need to be made aware of. I watched a video on The Verge where they did this same benchmark on the 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max, and they actually got better frame rates. So they got 84 frames per second when running the same exact benchmark I did at highest settings at 1080. So there's something happening here with the 16-inch and the 14-inch, and I don't know what it is. Is it a thermal constraint on the 14-inch? Is there just more power going to the GPU cores on the 16-inch? Whatever the case may be, the 16-inch is benchmarking better in these gaming tests. You're getting 14 more frames per second on that test, and that is quite significant. I'm also looking at the therm log here on macOS to see if we hit any thermal issues. That was one of my theories on why we were seeing lower performance on the 14-inch, and we're not seeing any thermal warnings pop up, which is telling me right now at least that on Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the differences between the 14 and 16-inch in performance had nothing to do with the thermal. So I think it might be a power supply thing. Like the 16 might just be able to put out more power and run everything at max clock speed on those GPUs where they're clocked higher. I don't know, but there is a little bit of a difference in performance between the 14 and 16-inch model. All right, let's try Civilization 6. This also has a graphics benchmark, and this one actually should be pretty well optimized for the Mac. Actually, Civilization 6 also has a iPad port. I wonder if they just released that iPad version on the Apple Silicon Mac, if it would run better. It probably would, right? Like, that's interesting. But let's see. So we're going to run this benchmark. We're running it on medium settings, and let's see what we get. Because usually this is a pretty good... this is a game that I play, so I'll be interested to see how this performs in a benchmark with, you know, a full map laid out, all these units and everything. And on medium settings, well, I'm not actually that impressed here. So, well, we are hitting 60 now, but yeah, oh, look at that. You're getting huge peaks in certain areas when the game's less busy. But when you get into these busy areas, you are dipping below 60 frames per second, which is something I don't like to see. So, Civilization 6, medium settings. You can kind of see how widely the frames per second varied. Hey, maybe they should just take that iPad version and bring it over to the Mac. But enough with these benchmarks. Let's actually go play some games instead, because we might be able to get a better idea on how this performs. So on Metro Exodus, we're going to run this at 1080p on medium settings. Let's see how that runs. Playing with the trackpad, always an ordeal. I should have grabbed a mouse, but you know, for the sake of simplicity in this desk setup, we'll just have to suffer through. But you can see that we are actually getting above 60 frames per second here, and sometimes going pretty high. Again, this is medium settings, not like high settings, but I'm pretty happy with this. And the game looks really good on medium settings, and you can kind of see like how great the mini LED display is. It's almost like a little boost in graphics anyway, just getting the mini LED display. And this is probably the settings I'd want to play this game at. Again, I kind of value that higher frame rate at 68 frames per second. And you can see on some of those scenes when we're burning the webs, it kind of falls below to 160. And, you know, at this point, with nothing really going on, we are getting to like 120 frames per second. So that's pretty good. This game's running really smooth, so I'm very happy with the performance of actual gameplay. Maybe these benchmarks are kind of tripping me up a little bit. Maybe it's the actual gameplay we should really be testing, because benchmarks, tend to throw a lot at you. But look at this. So here we can see a dip in the frame rate when this very intensive scene, we're getting below 60. So for a game like this, even though maybe we could crank up the settings to go higher, maybe hit around 30 frames per second, this is where I feel comfortable kind of recommending medium. Totally playable. Very playable. So another game we can try out here is League of Legends. This is a pretty easy game to run, so let's see if we can do it at very high at 120 frames per second. That would be really nice to do very competitively. And yeah, look at this. So we are getting that. We are getting above that. So we're getting 145 frames per second on the highest settings. So this game's pretty easy to run. I'm actually not exactly surprised here. But if you're just like a light casual gamer, if League of Legends is all you play, and you got one of these M1 Max MacBook Pros, you're basically seeing the performance you want out of this machine, and you get to take advantage of the higher refresh rate display. So for the most part, we're hitting 120 FPS on League. We're seeing some dips just below it, but this is good. So League of Legends obviously isn't a hard game to run, but it's running well enough to the point where I would feel pretty confident putting this on the highest settings, and then getting that good 120 frames per second that we want to see, even as we spin up, do some of the effects over there, have some of the minions on screen. You know, we're dipping a little bit below and we move around. If we zoom in more, I'm sure we could get a higher frames per second like that. But yeah, this is good. So on lighter titles like this, you know, this is the performance you want. And what's really interesting about playing League is the fans aren't spinning up at all here. Like, that's good. No fans at all. So what this is telling me here is that if you're playing like a competitive esports type game and it can run on Mac OS, you're basically going to see really good performance, which makes sense because these esport games are kind of designed to run on toasters, let's be honest. But the fact that we can run it at highest settings at 120 frames per second, that's what we want to see with a title like this, where every little millisecond, every little interaction, every little frame drop can make the difference between getting a win and losing. All right, so Epic can't stop us here, gamers. We got FortNite on Mac OS. You can't play it on the iPhone, but we got a Mac OS right here. So FortNite is another competitive free-to-play game. Now, unlike League of Legends, which ran really well, and honestly, I've tested it on like a ton of Macs, and it always runs pretty well. FortNite, notoriously, on Mac, is super not well optimized. So this is going to be an interesting game to test because this is one of the most popular games out there. Free to play. A lot of people will play it. And for some people, all they play is FortNite. So if the Mac can run FortNite pretty well, maybe you don't have to go out and buy a gaming laptop or a gaming PC. Now for the recommended settings, it's actually starting me off at high. So let's see how that runs. Let's try it on high and see if we can hit 120 frames per second, which again, on these competitive games, that's kind of what you want. So let's see if we can make a pro gamer move here. All right, we're in FortNite, and we're seeing, so on high settings, look at that. We're kind of hitting 120 sometimes. The problem with this game is the frame rate can be so sporadic depending on what you do. But we're definitely getting above 60 on high settings. Sometimes we get that 120 FPS, as you can see right here, especially when there's not that much going on. But if I run back into this town, you can see the frame rate just drops again instantly. So I feel like with FortNite, if you put this on maybe medium or low settings, you'd probably be able to get that constant 120 frames per second. But hey, even on high settings, you're getting close enough to that. And you're at least getting above 60 frames per second. Where on some of the other older Macs that I've tested, even those before the transition over to Apple Silicon, especially the 13-inch MacBook Pro, sometimes you wouldn't even get 60 frames per second. Look at this. Firefight. Look at this pro gamer move. He must be cheating. Must be view sniping. I'm actually like ninja. I'm good at this game, I swear. Aha, but I know the question you really want to know is, can this run Minecraft? Well, let's find out. So we are playing through Minecraft. Seems pretty smooth to me. Let's go ahead and check on the frame rate, though. There's a lot of information here, but you can see the frame rate up in the top left corner. And you can see we're running the display, too, at max resolution, it says. So we're running at 3024 by 1890. So that's really high resolution for this. I actually probably should have ran that lower. There's definitely frame drops below 60 frames per second as we move around and hit some of the blocks, see some of the particle effects as we move around, look at the world. This is with the 15 render block distance too, so that's right kind of, I believe, in the middle of these settings. I don't really play Minecraft, but it's a popular game that a lot of people request all the time. And it looks good on this screen, so I'm not really complaining with this performance. Again, you maybe want to lower the settings graphically if you want to hit higher frames per second, but in a game, if it's not competitive, what I like to see is at least 60 frames per second. And on, Minecraft, it looks like we're pretty much hitting that. All right, this one's for Gary, the everyday dad. I'm playing World of Warcraft. Now, another reason why I'm playing this game is because this is one of the only few games that is optimized for a Mac with Apple Silicon. So this is completely optimized for the ARM-based architecture, so this should run pretty well. One thing I'm noticing, though, is that every other game we played had like a 16:9 aspect ratio. This game's actually embracing the notch and it's cutting in here. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't know if we could change that somehow in the settings, but you know what? I'm just going to leave it here because it's kind of funny. And we're running this on the highest settings, by the way, because this is a game that's optimized for Mac, so I want to see, can it... I mean, World of Warcraft, again, it's an easy game to run, right? So on high settings, we should be able to do it. Let's just give this guy a name. Gary... Yeah, this will be Gary. Looks just like Gary. All right, Gary was taken, so I had to call him Gary Ted, the everyday dad. So this is our character, Gary, the everyday dad. Let's enter into a World of Warcraft world. Again, this is running on highest settings, so I have high hopes for this. I have high hopes for World of Warcraft. And this opening cinematic's looking pretty good. Can we skip this? I do want to skip this. Okay, we're getting 100 frames per second. And like I said, so you're really seeing the benefits of the optimization here on Mac OS because any of the other games we've tested, you might have noticed just how much the frame rates would fluctuate. But on here on World of Warcraft, we're actually getting 100 frames per second. I wonder if this is even, we might have to go into the graphics settings because this might actually just be locked at 100 frames per second. It might actually go higher. And look at this. So this was kind of being limited here. So let's go ahead and just raise the FPS up. Let's do it for everything. So look at this. We are getting, now that we've changed this, a full 120 frames per second. It's not dipping at all. The game is very well optimized. I know World of Warcraft, again, isn't the most demanding game out there, but you're really seeing the benefits of what a game is capable of when it's actually properly optimized to take advantage of the M1 Max chip because the frame rates are so stable. It is locked at 120 frames per second, so you can utilize the 120 hertz refresh rate in the display. Again, listen to the laptop. It is not making any noise. It just goes to show you how far optimization plays a role into these games. And I think that's a good place to end it here because the question of can a MacBook Pro, a 14-inch by the way, with the M1 Max actually be a gaming laptop? I think the answer to that is kinda. So it can kinda be a gaming laptop because a lot of the games we ran okay on it, right? Like we're at least getting 60 frames per second in most of the scenarios. And I think that's pretty much what you would want to ask from any gaming laptop. We also discussed how all these games are running on battery power. So if we were to compare a Windows laptop not plugged in running on battery power, how much performance would it lose running on the battery? And with this, you plug it in, you're on battery, it's going to be full power. But the real issue with gaming on a Mac all comes down to the software. Now, you'll notice we only played games that were optimized for Mac, and I got a lot of suggestions to use Crossweaver, which is basically like a software wrapper where you can play Windows games on the Mac. And in some instances, this works really well, but I had a ton of problems running CodeWeaver on my M1 Max Mac. Almost every game I tried to put on there, and I did a ton of workarounds, spent hours trying to get it to work, it just didn't work. So I just thought, why not focus on games that you can play on a Mac? If I'm having trouble with it, I'm sure a lot of people will have trouble with it as well, especially if you're more of a casual user, which I feel like I am sometimes. But if you're really into that technical aspect and you want to run Windows games on it, well, you can already check out a channel that does this. I'm going to give Andrew Ty a shout out because he did all of these demos running Crossweaver on how to actually get Windows games to perform on the Mac. And in some instances, the games he was playing worked pretty well for also kind of being through this software emulation. You could also use Parallels, but it seems that CodeWeaver through that emulation is the better way to go than running it through a virtual machine like Parallels. So if you're interested in that, check out his videos. He has some guides on how to do that. They didn't really help me that much, but maybe it'll help you if you have a little bit more patience than me. But again, back to this question of gaming on a Mac. Hey, I think you can, but it all comes with credits. So the 14-inch M1 Max, to its credit, is the best Mac I have ever tested when it comes to gaming. Seriously, I've even tried this on an iMac, and if you boot camp into Windows, you get better, but I'm talking about just gaming on Mac using Mac OS. This is the best performance I have personally seen without having to go into Windows. And the most impressive thing about it is that for most of these games, except for the exception of World of Warcraft, we were running those games through Rosetta 2 translation layer. So the M1 Max was losing a lot of performance. And the real thing here when it comes to Mac on gaming is that this could possibly be one of the best gaming laptops out there. But what it really requires is for game developers to actually develop for the Apple Silicon architecture, which is a tall order and is probably not going to happen unless Apple put in a ton of their own money into this and just invested into all of these game development studios out there and said, hey, we're going to pay you to make a Mac version of your game. And then I could see this actually gaining traction. But without that incentive, I really feel like people aren't going to be taking advantage of this architecture anytime soon. So the question of, can you game on a Mac? The answer is yes. There are limitations here. There are performance hits because you are running through a translation layer. And perhaps the better question of, should you game on a Mac, is kind of the ultimate question. Now, if you were just buying this Mac to play games on, I would say you're crazy. You can go get a bunch of Windows gaming laptops out there that will outperform this thing and will be cheaper than this thing because they don't have to do all those workarounds with the translation layers. It just runs natively on those platforms, so obviously it runs better on those platforms, regardless of what the benchmarks say about this M1 Max chip, which is impressive. But if you want a Mac, you're planning to use this machine for other things, like video editing, music production, or just a general entertainment laptop, you like macOS better, and you want to play some games on the side and you're aware of all the limitations that macOS brings when it comes to gaming, then the question of, can you game on a Mac, is kind of yes. And on a Mac laptop, even through the translation, this is some of the best performance I've seen yet. And I really think that just speaks to the power of what Apple has here with the M1 Max chip. And I'm just kind of excited to see if there is a future for Mac gaming. All right, everyone, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. If you got some other recommendations of some tests I should do on this machine, or maybe even another separate gaming video, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.